My name is Caitlin Cameron, and I am the project director for Thrive, which is the education and outreach arm for Ecovillage at Ithaca. We have had, a co-housing and eco-village community, we've had an education mission from the beginning to help share the ideas and lessons learned and concepts of intentional community, eco-villages, co-housing. And eco-village at Ithaca is both an eco-village and co-housing. Those two things don't always go together, although you will often find them together. And so you might be researching or visiting other communities that have one focus or the other, but we are both. And Ecovillage at Ithaca was founded in 1991. We have 3 neighborhoods that were built over time. So the first neighborhood, Frog, where Marcy lives, and where I live now, was developed in the mid-90s. Our second neighborhood, Song, was developed in the early 2000s. And then our third neighborhood, Tree, was developed and finished in 2015. So we have these 3 neighborhoods that are residential neighborhoods, but they're also kind of like living classrooms at times, where we have people come for tours, workshops, experience weekends, and things like that, to share and talk about what this kind of community is. And we have about 210 residents at this time. And I would say, are in our own evolution. So we've been around for a while, and we are considered an established community, but are also always talking about and thinking about, like, what's next for us? How do we evolve? So that's part of our conversation too, right? That we're a great model, but there are things that we could do differently or learn from, or keep improving on. So that's why we're here today. We have these monthly Q&As to provide an opportunity for those of you who may not be nearby to hear a little bit about our community and ask questions. So I'm going to introduce Marcy Little, who is a longtime Ecovillage resident, practically a founder, and currently lives in the first neighborhood. And I'll let her introduce herself a little more, and she's going to talk for a bit about her experience at Ecovillage and also the role of mindfulness in living in community. And then we'll open it up to the group for questions. And your questions could be about Marcy's experience, about mindfulness, or anything else related to the community. I'll just share one last piece. So I'm fairly new to the community. I've only been here a year. So I bring, I guess, to the conversation the perspective as someone who's been a renter, someone who is more recent, someone who lives child-free, lives car-free. Those are part of my experience that I can speak to. And with that, I will stop share and turn it over to Marcy to talk about her Ecovillage experience.
All right, thanks. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, great. My cat is here, just, so I'll be in and out petting him, and who knows what he'll do. Anything is possible. So hi, welcome. I'm so happy to be here. So I'm Marcy, my name is Marcy Little, and as Caitlin said, I've been living here for 26 years. So moved in as a single mother with my son, who was 4 months old, in August of 1997. Yes, that's it. And I had no idea what I was getting into. So very much unlike Neil, who's like been steeped in this for 3 decades. I was, in my late 20s, single mom. I knew I wanted to live not alone in an apartment, isolated in a city, like that was sort of where I was coming from. And at that time, the first neighborhood had just finished being built. And so I was coming in sort of at the same time as a lot of people. So the people who were really considered founders were part of that planning process that I was kind of grateful to have had someone else do, so that I could kind of come in when the thing was already built. But that's the physical infrastructure, and then there's the rest of the infrastructure, which is sort of what we're living on a daily basis together, and how we're living in community, and how do we share this intentional model that it's an experiment that we're trying to create or co-create, and that's always in the process of being created and co-created. So I got to live through all of the iterations of development thus far, because I came in at the ground level, and that's been a real interesting journey. Initially, it felt like an intrusion to have the second neighborhood, the land there being developed and constructed, and then all of these new people to get to know. And then and the first, like, I don't know, 5 to 6 years, it was just our neighborhood, and there were 30 households, and we were tight, 30 households, you really know each other. And most houses had kids, and I had my son. I ended up living in 3 different households as a renter, and then owning 3 different houses. I'm in my 6th house here in the first neighborhood. So that's a little interesting fact, that I think I'm the only one who can do a little happy dance and proclaim. But yeah, so we were tight, our kids were tight, we were growing up together. And then the second neighborhood comes, when it was part of the plan, it was part of the vision of the co-founders. And yet the living of it was somewhat of a shock. One of the upsides is that in the unearthing, huge rocks were turned up, and I was in the phase in my own, like, becoming a gardener development, where I was into using rocks to build rock walls. So I went and I harvested fantastic rocks, and I started to work with rocks, and that was a really fun part. And then the neighborhood got built, and it got settled, and all of these wonderful humans became people that I knew, and some of my dearest friends. And so we lived for a while, and we found a new harmony. It's like storm, form, norm, and then something changes, and you got to storm, form, and norm again. That's like group process. And then the third neighborhood. So now I was sort of like, oh, third neighborhood, been here, done that, development. But the people in the second neighborhood were like, oh, this feels like such an intrusion. So it's really interesting to sort of watch that process. And now that that's built, though the original vision was to have 5 neighborhoods, everybody's sort of like, okay, I think we're done. And I think it gets to a point where there are just so many people, you can feel like you actually know. So one of the things that's changed for me over time is that there are a lot of people coming in and out of the neighborhood. If I'm walking down the road and cars are coming in, it used to be that I would know every face, and it'd be like a hello and a wave. And now I would say the vast majority of people coming in and out, I don't recognize. And so that's one of the payoffs, I guess. I think that we're very original in the world in terms of co-housing communities, that we have 3 neighborhoods. Most co-housing communities have only 1. But the upside is that you have also a larger pool of people who you're going to really jive with. And I have to say that in every neighborhood, the people are fantastic. So that's not a problem. So yeah, so I came in as a single mom, and now my son is 26. And part of my experience of living here is that my son has Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And that's a very big piece of it. And that means that he stopped being able to walk at the age of 12, needed to be in a wheelchair. And he still lives here in our community, but he hasn't always lived with us. So at a certain point, the way that the community developed allowed for him to live independently with a live-in caregiver and a staff in the third neighborhood, but we could still be very, very close by. So who knew that this idea and its evolution and development would support our family's needs so beautifully, and it has. And And now he's living in the back of our house because that's what works best for everybody at this stage of the game. So that's just a little bit about me. I used to be a language teacher, and when I was working full-time as a mother with 2 kids with special needs, being an active part of community was challenging. It was very challenging. And I think that that's probably the biggest challenge for parents with young children. It's how do you plug in a way that where you have space and you have energy. I have left teaching. I had to leave for health reasons, and have since become a yoga teacher and a somatic based integrative health practitioner. So I have that practice and I work out of my house. And I have a lifestyle now that allows me, I have a lot more space, energy, time to devote to community. I'm currently the First Neighborhoods Frog Board president, for example. And so I'm very active. I lead committees. I do a lot of work that I couldn't do earlier as a mother of young children, or was harder. So that's an interesting evolution that takes place. And I find as I'm coming into, you know, my mid-50s, that I really appreciate first of all, the intergenerational aspect of living here. I have children on either side of our house that are the same age as we have grandchildren as my grandkids. And so I feel like grandma, you know, every time I walk out of my house, we interact, and I love that. And now I'm at an age where certain people were when we first moved in with my son, you know, and so these young children are seeing me as an old person. Just a little weird, but we have these relationships, you know, and we're going to have them over time. And my son, having lived here for 26 years, you know, there are people who have been part of his journey and my family's journey for that entire time. And so that's beautiful. So being a yoga and integrative somatic health practitioner, I have my own kind of practice around mindfulness. And I came to meditation, I don't know if you'd say it's early, but I came to it in college. So I've been at it for a long time. And coming to meditation at that time it changed my life. Frankly, it changed the course of my life. And living in community and having a mindfulness, a mind-body based practice has been indispensable. And so I'm going to just talk about that for a little bit. One of our founders, Liz, loves to talk about how when we arrive in community, we're like a jagged edged stone. And then over the course of living here, sort of like it's being like the stone in the stream, we bump up against each other, and the stone gradually smooths, its edges begin to smooth, you know. And when I think about me, when I moved in here and where I was in terms of my own personal development, I didn't have a clue how to live with other people. My experience of living in community was really based on my family systems. And let's face it, family systems tend to be a place where we experience all kinds of patterns and ways of relating with one another, and not always the most conducive to being healthy with one another, treating each other with respect, treating ourselves with respect, knowing that, you know, that we are I don't even know how I want to end that sentence, but that we are creatures of light and love, really. And so I made a mess for sure, and we're messy. People are messy, and we bump up against each other in community all the time, and it can be messy. And there are decisions that we're making together as community members that also can sometimes trigger places in ourselves that we may not even have known existed, you know? And so we have these incredible opportunities to get to know ourselves in a way that living alone in an apartment or even just with your family never provide, because we're going to see ourselves reflected in others and how we show up all the time. And the decision-making process is just like an incubator place for one of those things to occur. And some of the decisions that seem to trigger the most difficulty for people have to do with money, pets, and children. And those seem to be the places and the things that are the hardest for us. You know, those are our heartstrings or our fears around I mean, money is just basic survival instinct gets touched. So having a mindfulness practice over time has allowed me to keep myself in check. First of all, to take responsibility for myself. And that's the very, very, very first thing. And I don't know if you're familiar with Resmaa Menachen's book, My Grandmother's Hands, but he talks a lot about becoming an adult is actually taking responsibility for your own nervous system. And if you take that for a moment, it's a deep, deep thing, you know, and so it can take a while living in community to start realizing, wow, this is my trigger. Wow, this is my responsibility. And mindfulness, the term, I don't know if you know this, it came from Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Vietnamese monk. He died recently, and he was working with Vietnamese monks and nuns after the war, and there was terrible, terrible trauma in their country, and the people didn't know, you know, they were just riddled in it. And he gave them a practice that allowed them to stay present so that they weren't caught in their trauma all the time. And now it's developed and changed, and my practice is very body centric. So that's sort of like the thing nowadays, somatics, you know, it's body centered. So I'm paying attention to the signs that my body give me all the time. So for example, when someone says a thing and I notice my heart start pumping, I'm like, oh, that's my nervous system, you know, doing what you know, it's noting, oh, something here feels threatening in some way or whatever. And so the mindfulness practice comes in as a tool to help us navigate these relationships when we get touched, when we get impacted, when we get a little bit bumped. You know, the first step is to even notice that it's happening. And then a deeper mindfulness practice begins to allow us to see how our worldview is created. Obviously, you know, what are the patterns? What are the structures that I see as true, and are they true? So it's if you have a mindfulness practice, I'm sure you know just what I'm talking about. You know, it's like, how can we actually evolve if we're not bringing to consciousness that which is unconscious? So I have found it to be an incredibly valuable tool almost every single day in living here. I don't get triggered every day. No, I really love my not that I don't. Let me back that up again. I feel like being triggered is just part of being human, and some people are going to trigger me more than others. Some things are going to trigger me more than others. Sometimes I just don't even know what's going to trigger me, but I tend to know myself well enough that I do know most of the time. So yeah, so for example, something came up recently. I'm leading a committee around documenting our consensus process. And because we're at a stage in our history where many of the ways that we work, such as making decisions, function sort of as an oral history. And many of our founders have moved out. And if we want to continue and have it be a transparent process, we need to maybe document it now so that new people, when they come in, they have this, they can see what it is. I understand consensus from having lived it for 26 years. And it's something that, you know, you have to really live to get into your body and into your cells, because we're not really trained to make decisions based on consensus with the people that we live with, right? I don't know, maybe your family system was really evolved and enlightened in that way. Definitely not mine and whatnot. So, and someone had a reaction to this in a kind of way. And her reaction to it caused me to have a reaction. And old me would have written or replied from that place. Mindful Marcy said, oh, I see that if I were to respond right now, it would be coming from reactivity. So I'm just going to wait. I'm going to wait until I'm relaxed again and my head is cleared and I feel, you know, neutral or just back to is whatever. And then, and in that space, what I actually want to say, which comes from a place of wisdom, will arrive, and then I'll know what to say. And so I practiced that, and the outcome was really positive, really positive. So instead of creating sort of drama or perpetuating drama, mindfulness practice, I feel like, is essential. And if we're going to bump up against each other, even more essential. And a lot of people here, I feel like, really already have a mindfulness practice. It seems to attract people because it's conscious living, you know, we're trying to live consciously, we're living intentionally. So it tends to attract people who already have a practice, or who have a propensity for this kind of thing, or who already have done a lot of their own personal work or know themselves pretty well. And when you haven't, it's going to show, you're going to feel it right away. It's gonna, you know, you're going to get touched. And yeah, so that's sort of what I have to say about that. And this came up in a conversation with Caitlin, and I guess you thought you wanted to know more what I meant by that. So this is a little bit of what I mean by that. I hope that's clear. Yeah, so that's pretty much what I have to say about that.
That's great. I think that's a wonderful perspective that we don't hear a lot about when people talk about living in community. You know, I think we hear a lot more about governance models and processes and things like conscious communication. So that's why I wanted to just touch on the mindfulness topic as another component to living in this kind of community. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
So we generally open up the floor at this point to the group for questions. So I invite folks to, probably the best way would be to use the raised hand icon, raised hand tool, so I can see who has a question. I see Chris, go ahead.
Thank you. I'll lower my hand. Thank you for all that information and the, perspective about mindfulness and how useful that is living in community. You talked about the 3 neighborhoods, and I wondered if the 3 neighborhoods function as a single entity. I've talked to other, like, I don't know if you may know the folks in Ann Arbor with the 3 co-housing communities there, which are all separate, legal entities. And I'm wondering if, for you all, if it's all one big legal entity or if it's 3 separate government bodies.
So I can give a stab, and Caitlin, you'll probably have stuff to say about this too.
Sure.
So back in the day, the land was bought, and it was 178 acres. And as each neighborhood was built, each neighborhood has its own footprint and is self-governing. And then we also we share infrastructure and we share the land. So we also have village-wide governance. So, for example, we'll have certain agreements or guidelines that we abide by in our neighborhood that may not be exactly the same in the second neighborhood or in the third neighborhood. For example, we have a consensus-based decision-making process in the first and the second neighborhood, but in the third neighborhood, they use something called sociocracy or dynamic governance. And it's really different. It's still ultimately consensus-based, but it functions differently. The process is very, very different. So that's just an example. And so in a month, there'll be a meeting, a neighborhood-wide meeting where we take care of business, and there'll also be a village-wide meeting where we take care of village business. So certain decisions are made in neighborhoods, and certain decisions are made where we all come together and we share this land. So that's really a big factor. And then we also have a board that's in charge of the land outside of our footprints, which is not resident based. We have people on that board that come from off-site, for example. Some are residents and some are not. And they take care of, for example, renting out land to farmers or, that kind of stuff. So they're sort of like concentric circles, if you will. That help answer your question?
Yeah, and just a point of clarification about the last piece, you said that the board that governs the land outside the footprints includes people from outside the community
Yep,
or outside the village, I guess.
yeah, yep.
And just to clarify, those are legal entities as well. So we have 5 legal entities at Ecovillage. Each neighborhood is its own legal entity with its own governance. And then we have the Village Association, which is a legal entity, and then the land holding group is called EVI Inc. And they're a nonprofit, so they have a board, but you can be a member of EVI Inc. And that membership is open to anyone who is interested. You don't have to be an Ecovillage resident.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. I have many more questions, but I will let other people.
But you do have to be an EVI resident to be on the other 4 boards. So to be on the first neighborhood board, for example, you have to live here, which is an important distinction and super important because we do have people who own shares that don't live here, and they're not necessarily involved in day-to-day community life, so they have a different perspective on what's important and what's not important, which would influence their voting. So it's really important that the residents be on the boards that ultimately make the decisions that affect the life here.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more point on this topic, which is the 3 neighborhoods are actually cooperatives, which is a legal entity that may not work or be allowed depending on what state you're in. So in New York State, you do run into quite a few residential communities that are cooperative entities, but that in many ways is similar to a condo association, but it does mean that we, like Marcy and I, as residents, we're technically not homeowners here, we're shareholders. So we hold shares, we occupy a home, and the cooperative technically owns the property in the neighborhood, and we are shareholders that are given access to live in the home and be in control of the interior of the home. And
Yeah.
the cooperative sort of owns and maintains the exterior of the home, the common amenities and that sort of thing.
Exactly. Actually, the second neighborhood does not function as a co-op, interestingly enough. So their monthly maintenance fees in the second neighborhood are less because they do own their whole houses over there. It's the first and third neighborhoods that function as co-ops. Yeah.
So the first and third neighborhoods, do residents, are there, one thing I heard you say is the first and third neighborhoods, the co-ops maintain the exteriors of the buildings.
But it's a multi-million-dollar operation up here, completely run by volunteers. So everything, when we say it's owned by, that's still us. It's all of us.
Right. I understand. But
Okay.
That was one of my other questions was like, who owns the outside of the buildings? And it sounds like in the second village, owners own the individual structures. And so you folks are shareholders, although you're not owners at all. How does being a shareholder, like, what does that mean?
Well, it means that we're responsible for the inside of our houses to the drywall, to the other side of the drywall, and that the co-op, through our maintenance fees, we plan ahead,
Sure.
what will be maintained. So money is collected every month and put into these different funds. And the co-op is responsible for the outside to the studs, basically.
And so do people own property in the first and third villages?
No, it's owned by the co-op. It's owned by the co-op, but the co-op is us, so it's it's a little tricky, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious about, and I want to give other people the opportunity to ask questions, but I'm curious about like what that means of somebody moving in or buying in. If I sell my home here and I come to live in community number 1, what the economics of that are,
So you would pay a fee, you would buy the shares, other people would buy the house. You're buying the shares then that are the houses then in your name with that number of shares. And you live in your house, you take care of the outside of your the gardens areas and whatnot. But if like there's a problem with the siding, then you contact the maintenance team and it gets addressed by the volunteers who work on the maintenance team, for example. And sometimes we need to hire contractors to do work. Sometimes things can be maintained by the people and the skills that are here on site.
And so when people from the community sell, communities 1 and 3, they're selling shares.
Selling shares, exactly. Yep. Yeah, but the price of the shares will look just like the price of a house with this square footage in this area, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And it might be a good opportunity to talk a little bit about the monthly maintenance bill. I believe someone had submitted a question ahead of time about that. You know, what are some of those fees associated with living in a community like this? So the way we've been set up, and Marcy can jump in if I don't characterize it quite right, but we have monthly maintenance bills. So in addition to purchasing your home, you know, whatever dollar amount you're paying to acquire the home, we have a monthly bill that is assessed that includes many things. So again, if you kind of keep that analogy of a condo association or an HOA, there's some typical things related to monthly maintenance. Some neighborhoods also have like future savings towards, you know, future common expenses. That we're also paying for most of our utilities through that bill. We're actually paying taxes as part of that bill. So instead of paying taxes at the end of the year or once a year, that is incorporated on a monthly basis. There also, if you participate in community meals, or purchase eggs, or, you know, some of these more voluntary things that we have, that would also show up on your monthly bill. What else am I forgetting, Marcy, that goes into those fees?
Co-computing, internet, but I would back it up. I would, like, once a year, we approve a budget. So we have a finance team that has their eyes on the prize. You know, they're like, here are the things that we've determined that are going to need our maintenance or in the future, or blah 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 blah, blah, you know. And we come together and they present the yearly budget and last year's budget, just for being able to compare when things go up or if they've gone down. Like last year, we didn't end up using money on the carport, so we're gonna reallocate those funds or just lower the overall cost of the budget, you know, et cetera. And so neighborhoods get a chance to understand, you know, what are all these line items. And one of the interesting distinctions that takes a while for people to understand is that there are certain things that are charged per share. So if you have a larger home and a larger footprint home, then you're going to pay a higher percentage. And then there's certain things that we share based on unit cost, unit fees. And so that's another distinction, depending upon what the line item is, you know. So.
And there are a few things, just to finish the thought, and then Inez, we'll go to you. There are a few things that are optional amenities. So Marcy mentioned carports. We do not provide carports for each home. And so some households have a carport parking space, some do not. So there are fees associated with that if you have a carport space. Bike storage, our neighborhood Frog has a bike storage room. So you pay a nominal fee a month to keep your bikes in that room. If you want to use the laundry services in our common house, that's another small fee to maintain the machines, buy the supplies. So there are a whole host of
Wood
things.
and metal shop. We have a wood and metal shop also.
Yeah.
It's another
Yeah.
one. Yeah,
Right. So there are these things that might be additional things that you choose to participate in, that might show up.
or if you have an electric car and you use electric for your vehicle, for example, that would be another one that's individual.
So it gets quite complicated, and you know, the people volunteering to be on the finance team are kind of heroes in my mind because
The
it's,
rock stars.
yeah, it's very complex the way that we've set ourselves up. And so yeah, I'll end it there, and we'll go to Inez. I think you had a question.
Can't hear you, Inez. Still can't hear you. Oh, there we go.
Okay, who sets the prices for the homes? Is it the homeowner, the shareholder, or is it the board?
Yeah, so the shareholder or the homeowner, it will set their price. And usually they find a price based on what houses recently have sold at up here or in the community. And, you know, they get to determine that. So
Okay.
people sell it. Yeah.
And there
Yeah.
can be quite a range, depending on which neighborhood you're in. Because we have a variety of home sizes. And in our most recent neighborhood, we also have some condos. So the common house was developed to also have 15 more like condo style homes above it. So that's like a 4-story building that are studio, 1-bedroom, and 3-bedroom condo. So we have a lot of options in terms of housing types. But there is also a little bit of a demand, you know, what's the demand,
Mhm.
and that sort of thing does come into play. We don't have price ceilings or you know, conservation,
Minimum.
you know,
Mhm.
we don't have any mandatory restrictions in terms of deed restrictions or anything on home prices.
I would add just a couple of things about that. First thing I wanted to just sort of share is that the third neighborhood, all of the homes and the apartments in the common house were built to be able to age in place. So, and the condos that Caitlin was talking about, you all have roll-in entries. So that's a feature that was really, that became important in terms of the model of sustainability. You know, we don't often think about that when we think about sustainability. It's like, well, who am I going to be 30 years from now if I stay, or 20 years from now, and what will my physical needs be? So that was one thing I just wanted to put in the hopper because I think it's really cool. And I feel like our family was very influential in bringing that kind of awareness to the community because of my son and our stepdaughter. So that was just one thing. And then ultimately the board signs off on any sales and purchases. And there's a process that people go through, an educational process, et cetera. And some of you maybe have already begun that. That includes a 5-day visit and being parts of a meeting.
Meetings and
Stuff. Yeah, all the good stuff. And so the board ultimately will sign off. And I know, for example, an apartment in the common house in the third neighborhood is being sold right now for a price that seemed very unusually high. If you're aware of this.
yeah, 239.
Well, this one was being sold for 300. So that's what I'm talking about. Like 239 was sort of still in the ballpark, but this one was going for 300. And that was something that people who knew each other were working out between them to, but the rest of, you know, many people in that community were up in arms about that because it was so radically different from the normal price range. And it begins to then skew and influence further sales. So we do, when we sell, we do have a responsibility, you know, to this place that we love when we leave it, to, you know, and everybody feels the ethics of that in their own way, I guess. And
Yeah, I want to just add to that, you know, I was able to transition from a renter situation in the second neighborhood to becoming a shareholder in the first neighborhood. And the person who sold me this house, she cared about who was going to live here, right? And I think that's kind of what Marcy's alluding to is, you know, ideally when people are leaving or moving out of the house, that they keep in mind who's going to be a good fit for this kind of community. And you know, I wasn't even the highest bidder on the house. I learned later because but I won the bid because the seller cared about having me stay in the community. So that doesn't always happen. Some people, the money is also very important. So yeah, it's a little all over the place. But I did want to share one other point, which is kind of central to a lot of co-housing, intentional community setups, which is we are also sharing quite a bit of amenities. So, you know, when you live here, even though, you know, thinking about these monthly maintenance costs and what it might cost to buy into the community, you're also getting so much that that you might not otherwise get on your own, but you're also getting that shared responsibility in terms of maintenance. And, you know, not everyone has to then buy their own lawnmower and their own laundry equipment and things like that. Like the cost of living in some ways might be reduced by living in a community like this. Yeah. So, and the other component to that is the homes tend to be a little bit on the smaller side. They're highly energy efficient. So they're passive solar design, so your utilities tend to be on the lower side. In fact, in the third neighborhood, they were built to be all electric and passive house, which is a sort of a special design standard that's very rigorous. And some of those homes are net zero, meaning that they produce as much energy as they consume. And so their utility bills are very, very low. So those are all just considerations when thinking about the cost of living.
Some of those houses in the third neighborhood sell back to the grid, in fact, which is kind of a cool thing. Yeah, not all the houses are net zero, but many were built with that in the third neighborhood. And in our first neighborhood, you know, being the first generation, we have tall south-facing windows. And in the wintertime, it is heaven. Because that sun is coming right in, it hits the back wall of my living room, for example, and the sunshine, it just keeps everything fresh. And there's a lot of heat that is generated. And I was just going to add that I was talking to a neighbor up here, and she moved here a few years back from a house in Brooktondale, one of the suburbs of Ithaca, country suburb. And they were paying like $1,000 a month for their heating, for example. And she's like, when I think about if I were to leave here and live somewhere else, she's like, it's cheap here. It doesn't feel cheap when the maintenance bill comes every month. But if you really begin to look at the true cost of living, you know, it's like butts are covered. Stuff is really covered here. And yeah, then there's the social bit. And so many of our social needs get filled here or met here that you don't have to go off site and pay for this and pay for that and do all this stuff necessarily. You may still want to, but a lot of that is taking place right here. So there's a lot of cost that you can't even, that's intangible, you can't really put a finger on.
Is there information online about the cost for the homeowners, the monthly fees that you're talking about?
Not that I know of.
I don't think we get specific online about numbers, but that's something that I could talk to you about, or, you know, if you wanted to go through the membership process, that kind of information you start to get into. I mean, just to give ballpark,
the range in Frog, I can just tell you is,
yeah, I was just going to do that. Go ahead.
You're gonna do, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, one at a time, please.
The smallest units, which Caitlin lives in, probably range from $600 or $700 a month in maintenance fees. Ours is the largest unit, and ours ranges from $1,200 to $1,500 a month in maintenance fees.
Yeah, and I would say
Okay.
the condos in Tree, for example, are in that sort of 500 to 600 range.
A little over 600.
Yeah,
The electricity comes in is closer to 8.
Okay.
I know because I own one.
Right. Well, I don't, the studios, I think, well, anyway, yeah, let's say
Yeah, studio
600, the 600 is kind of the baseline for those smallest units. Neil, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. So I got the numbers. I was going to kind of go down that road. What kind of bills are you seeing monthly? So now I know, and I'm surprised at how high it can get. What's the square footage of those homes that have a 4-figure monthly?
So the square footage of our house,
Yeah.
that's, you know, is 1,750 feet, but we have a large footprint because we put an addition on the back of our house.
Right,
So
right. Okay.
so the way that the footprint is calculated has to do with like how much touches and how big your house is square footage
Right.
wise. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. But I'm also realizing as I'm hearing that and asking my own question that square footage is not the only determinant of the amount, right? So,
Correct.
so what kind of maintenance have you both seen in this year, for example? What were some of the larger items that you had to kind of foot the bill for?
Well, it's just simply collected. And then the things that are the upkeep that I see happening on a regular basis is, you know, painting the siding. The roofs were recently redone for metal roofing, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay, I was gonna guess about roof.
There was a need to touch the vapor barriers and siding for a part of this neighborhood, so that was probably a larger expense in a couple of most recent years. There was also the decision to pave a portion of our main road. The main road that comes into our community was gravel for many, many years, and the dust from that was affecting some of the homes. So that was a large expense that was shared by the whole community and was sort of paid off over a couple of years. So
Yes.
that was then like an additional line item on your monthly bill.
Mhm.
But the you know, it really can vary. So if in terms of what those bills are like, so in the Song neighborhood, we talked about how those homeowners are more on the hook for their whole home maintenance. And the reason for that is because those homes are much more customized. So the original residents designed and built their own homes. So they're unlike the other neighborhoods where it's a more standard design. So, but they are all duplexes. So those homes are sharing utilities like the furnace and the hot water heater. And so some of those homes are starting to have to replace the utilities. And that's a shared expense between the two households.
Yeah, and there's something in the works right now to revamp our energy systems over here in the first neighborhood. We have something called cluster heating. So we have like 4 quadrants and we share a boiler and a backup boiler, and those go through the crawl spaces to do the heat for each house and whatnot. And there's a group right now who's working to get us on electric, all of us on electric, and it's a big project and there are lots of grants involved and da 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 da. I just wanted to add another cool thing about living here is that we have these maintenance folks. So for example, if I'm having a problem even inside of my house, which is my responsibility, I can text my friend Jeff who's on maintenance. I'd be like, Jeff, this thing is happening. And he's like, I'll be right over. You know, so another hidden Benny.
Yep. I'd love to hear what others here who haven't spoken are curious about. And you can just decide where to put this in, if at all, Marcy, but I'm curious, why 7 homes? What caused you to have the desire to shift? I make up that the family needs were part of it, but feels less important because there might be other more important questions in the room, but I just wanted to
That's fine. That's kind of a fun question for me to answer. So when I first moved in, it was my son and I moved in with another family with a young person. And after a year of living together, another neighbor was like, why don't you come live with me? And it would be just one woman. So we tried that out and we lived there for a year. And then another neighbor was like, I'm looking for someone to live here and you'd have the whole house except for on weekends. And we're like, well, let's go. And then I bought my first house and then it became, and then my son's needs started to progress. And when a house that had more accessibility,
Right.
We moved to that one. And then I got remarried. And when it was time to put in an addition and put in an endless pool so that my son, who was now in a wheelchair, could get in the water to stay, you know, to use his body, that's what we did. So that's how that happened. It's very sort of personal.
Yeah.
Thanks,
But there
Brad.
are a couple of examples too, of people who,
Sizing, downsizing.
yeah, so might have started out as founding members in the first neighborhood, and as they age or as their kids move out, they have moved to smaller units within the same community, but changing
Maria
homes.
and Ray, for example.
Yeah.
And when this
that's
house
different.
was for sale, I was like, Chris, you need to buy that house if our families are ever going to live together, because we didn't live together yet, because it was the biggest house. And so that was it too. Yeah.
We did get questions um from Natalie. Natalie, do you want to voice those questions, or would you like me to read them?
Sure. Actually, do you mind if I ask a different question?
Sure.
Shoot.
And it's great to meet you guys. Sorry I was late. Work kind of bled into lunch today, but I love hearing about the level of mindfulness that goes into how you organize your community and how you have your conversations. And I just think that is such a special thing. So I kind of want to replace my question with one about that. So this is very open, it's not very detail oriented, but how would you describe how mindfulness ties into your relationships with your homes and the land, in addition to how it ties into people?
Oh, I love that question. It's huge here. It's huge here for me personally. And I think it's huge here for many, many residents who have a very intimate relationship with the land, and for whom that is very central. If you were to ask them, like, what do you love most about living here? They would say, I love the land. So yeah, there's sustainability, and we are stewards of this land, and there are many, many different groups and committees that you can participate in that plant trees, deal with invasive species. It's like almost every weekend there's something going on that deals with the land and our relationship with the land. And I know at the village level, the facilitator, she starts every meeting with honoring the land. And so there's tremendous consciousness around that. And also my next door neighbor, she's like the Greta Thunberg of Ecovillage. She is really 100% about zero plastics. And she has brought that mindfulness into our village-wide consciousness and awareness and practices for sure. And I know she's been working with the cook team, for example, to continue to help the cook team become even more mindful in their practice. But like the cook teams, we try as much as possible to source from local farms, if there's going to be meat from local farms, pasture raised, etc. So I think you would find it on every level, that it's just integrated into everything that we do here.
I'll add to that too. So this is my first time owning a home. I've been a renter my whole adult life to this point, and I would say I don't know if it's exactly mindfulness, but I appreciate not having to put as much time and energy and thought into the home the way that a lot of people in this country have to spend, their weekends mowing lawns and repairing this and that and the other. Some people enjoy that. I would rather just have a nice home to live in and not have to worry about, saving enough money to replace the siding, or, and of course there's always going to be a little bit of home maintenance stuff, right? But that ease, that it gives me an ease of mind knowing that we're sharing that load, right? And if I have a problem, or if there's a bigger problem, I'm not on my own. But on the more mindfulness side of things, I am a certified forest bathing guide, and that's something that I offer once in a while on our land. And part of the rationale there is we tend to take care of things that we have a relationship with. And so, really just helping us, helping myself at the basic level, but anyone else who wants to attend, just continuing to build that relationship with nature, with the land, as a reminder of, we're a part of that bigger system, and being appreciative of what's around me and not taking that for granted. So that's a practice that I have and that I try to offer to the community as well.
Yeah, I could see you liking that, Natalie. I wanted to add, like, I went on a trip this summer to a place called Fisher's Island off the coast of Connecticut, and what our friends who live there, they are very active in community life there. And so it was really interesting to see how my experience and breadth of knowledge that comes just from being part of the listserv with all of these amazing minds, who are sharing their knowledge and their expertise all the time. Someone puts out a question, it's answered. So when they would start to talk about something island focused, I just had this breadth of experience and knowledge base where I hooked right in. And I think they were like surprised. And I was sort of surprised, you kind of leave the premises and you start connecting with other places. You're like, holy cow, like, just, talking to, like, he's a landscaper. I'm like, oh, do you use indigenous species? Like, what kinds of, and that kind of stuff that in a normal mindset wouldn't necessarily be things you'd be tuned into. So it's a wonderful thing. We come with what we have, and then we're just constantly being educated here, I feel. And so it's a great question, and it's always growing.
Just one more point on that. And then I think I saw another question. So I think climate change is certainly another area where mindfulness comes into the picture. Recently, the way that we've been impacted by climate change include the wildfires in Canada that has affected our air quality from time to time. We had moments of drought early in the summer. I think when you live in a home that is in touch with natural rhythms, when you live so close to the land, when you're growing your own food or getting food from one of the farms on our property, there's a connection to the seasons, to the weather that develops. And when that changes, we're having issues with jumping worms, with invasive species. And the conversations around that, the collective mourning or worry that is coming from that, but also, how do we deal with it? Certainly that is more apparent in a setting like this, but also I think easier to work with when you have a community like this.
I want to add just one more thing. So also on our vacation, we then were with some other parts of our family, and like Caitlin said, we had a lot of difficult smoky air coming down for whatever reason. We were just like south of it came here. I'm particularly sensitive to that health-wise. I have an air purifier in every room. I'm sensitive to things like mold. And so and we're talking about it here with our neighbors and whatnot. And when I went to be with family, it was like, this kind of stuff wasn't even on their radar. It didn't come up. It was like the first thing I wanted to talk about. And it became apparent immediately that it was like, oh no, we don't talk about this stuff. No, we're not worried about climate change. Like, life is normal. But that is not the consciousness here, and I know that it's not the consciousness in a lot of places, but like Caitlin is saying, when you've got this sort of a group awareness and consciousness that's being shared, and that we're taking certain actions together as a group and individually, it's powerful.
I think, Inez, did you have another question?
Yeah, it's a quick question. It's not the most important reason, but as a person of color, I was interested in knowing how ethnically diverse is Ecovillage.
Yeah, actually, I recently did a demographic study and I want to go pull up those numbers to give you a more quantitative answer, but Marcy, do you want to start answering from a more qualitative?
Yeah, the qualitative is that there's not going to be a lot of people that look like you here, Inez.
I figured. But
Yeah.
the first person I met when I went there was a Black woman.
Oh, good. Who was that?
I don't know her name. We just said hello. I was walking through and I said hi. That was it.
Yeah,
So-
it's very white. It's very white.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It has always been the wish for that not to be true.
Yeah.
You know, and part of that seems to be that, I don't know, I think that there are many factors that make that true. Economically speaking, is, you know, we have certain funds set up that we try to make it more accessible. For example, for people on all levels of the spectrum economically, but it's not, you know, so that's a huge piece of it too. What did you find, Caitlin?
yeah, so we have about 10% of our population are people who are BIPOC. And about 12 or 13% that are LGBTQ plus. Only 4% identify with a disability. I don't have, and we also have about 8% roughly that are new Americans, so people who are immigrating from other countries. I don't have information right now about like socioeconomic status. But I have numbers around age, and each neighborhood is a little bit different in terms of like the diversity or demographics of the neighborhood. So the third neighborhood especially has an older population partly because it was designed to be more friendly to accessibility and aging in place. So yeah, it will vary a little bit from neighborhood to neighborhood. But yeah, those are the numbers as I know them right now. When it comes to racial diversity, we're about 10% BIPOC.
Thank you.
Yeah. Are there any last questions before we wrap up? Chris, I see you.
Sure. Yeah. Did you say earlier that utilities are part of the assessment, or it depends on the neighborhood? And
They show up on your monthly maintenance fee. Yeah. Yep.
And some homes have solar panels, solar hot water on them, some do not. So there's going to be a mix of numbers depending on how large your home is, which neighborhood you're in, whether your neighborhood has a community solar grid, whether you have your own solar. So there will be some variation there. Some people have also added after the fact air sourced heat pumps. So something that we're experiencing is more hot days. Like today, it's like gonna be in the 90s here. So some people have decided to add heat pumps to help with heating and cooling extremes. And so that's something that would increase your electricity bill.
So so are the homes air conditioned?
Not initially. They were not built initially with air conditioning. So if you want that, people will do window units or movable units, whatever the term is, you know what I'm saying? Like they'll have
air conditioners,
aftermarket solutions, or they will do the heat pumps, install the heat pumps for that reason.
Got it.
Yeah.
So we haven't heard from David or Sandra. David or Sandra, is there anything you have a burning question that you'd like to ask in our final few minutes? Sandra, you're on mute. Oh, Sandra, we can't hear you because you're muted. And I have to let you know, I really love your grandsons. They're so fun.
No.
Fun.
Yes, I do too.
Travel in packs. It's amazing. They all go up to do laundry together and they all come back together. They love being together. It's really amazing. Yeah.
My daughter calls them her puppies because oftentimes they're all three on the floor rolling around like puppies. But anyway, yes, I don't have any burning. This has been very, very informative session, so I truly appreciate it. But a lot of my questions get answered as they come to mind, and I ask them because my daughter and her family are there. So, but thank you.
Yeah. David, anything?
I guess my only question would be is, in the purchasing of the property, if someone decides to buy it, is there a selection process by the committee on people, or it's just come and do your due diligence time and spend the 5 days, and if you at that point have done those requirements, you are the sole decider of buying a property there, not a committee?
So no committee decides. People who go through the membership process, Caitlin can speak more, she's on the membership team. But I've done a lot of work on it as Frog Board president. But yeah, once you're through the membership process, you can put a bid on a house that comes up for sale, and the person selling it will decide who they sell to. So, but you can't bid on a house if you haven't gone through the membership process.
So
Right.
Oops.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, is there real estate agents involved? How's the sale of a
Very
piece of
rarely.
It all
Really?
happens in-house here. Yeah, the membership team knows what houses are available as they come up, and they'll put you in touch, and it runs very, very smoothly. In fact, the lawyer who's been doing the work, he does both sides of the deal. He does it. He works for the seller and he works for the buyer. It works, you know.
Mhm.
So a couple of things to keep an eye on if you're interested in our community specifically. On the Ecovillage website, there's a rentals and sales page. So units coming available are listed first internally for a week. And
Mhm.
then they open up and are listed on that website. And usually the membership team, if you've completed the membership checklist, then we keep your information in a database, and I think that they will notify people that something's come available, but it's also generally your responsibility to just kind of check that website from time to time. But the other resource for you all is the Living Here page on our website is where the membership information lives. So there are links to virtual tours, to informational videos, and our checklist that we have for the membership process. So there's more information there. And then once you've looked at that, you can, if you want to continue the process, there's a team of us that you would work with to make sure you've that you're set up with meetings and community events and things and tours and things like that.
Okay, that's great. That was one of my concerns, is how does that process start on coming? You come up there, I'm coming from Atlanta, so I come up for 5 days.
Sure.
I'm staying with family, let's say, because I haven't been able to find anything local, but
Yeah.
I stay with family, then there's some kind of schedule set up for me that says this is what we're gonna kind of go through in this 5-day period, the tour on Saturday and all these other activities and functions and
For the most part, that's how it works, but there quite a bit of that checklist can be done remotely.
right.
So many of our meetings still happen through Zoom. There are events like this that might be accessible. So there are some things that you could start to do from where you are before.
I
Yeah,
guess I'm talking about the actual 5 days you're there.
yeah.
What's that
So
involved?
when you have committed to coming, then you would work with the prospective resident team to make sure you are set up with a tour, and they would make you aware of any events like volunteer work parties or community events or community meals or
Okay.
volunteer activities that might be going on during your stay. And sometimes there's more activity than others. So you could even email that group that their email is listed on that page to say, like, is there a particular month or week where it might be better time to come?
Okay.
But this is actually a good opportunity for me to just mention a couple more opportunities like that. So like we have these monthly Q&As. And the next one is going to be about internal communication systems. So like these Q&As are another way of staying involved and learning about the community. But we also have restarted experience weekends. And that's a more curated version of that 5-day visit. So this is a weekend. You would only get like 3 of your days. But it's an opportunity to meet a lot of those membership requirements in a more sort of curated, concentrated time. The next one is coming up in November. But this is also an experience for people who are just interested in co-housing, eco-village community life in general. So maybe you're not necessarily convinced you want to come live in our community, but it is a more immersive experience and a way to begin to understand what it might be like to live in community. So so keep an eye on so the Thrive website is where these kinds of opportunities are listed. And so this is kind of the list of like outlets, like our social outlets. We have a newsletter. My email is listed here. The website is listed here. So these are ways of kind of keeping in touch with the programs that are being offered online and in person.
Super, thank you.
Yeah. So we are at the end of our time. I would like to thank Marcy for sharing your time with us. And I want to thank all of you for being here with your great questions and attention. And like I said, you're welcome to come back to these sessions if you want to hear from other folks. You can contact me directly with more questions. And if you plan on coming, let me know and I'll probably be working with you in one way or another.
You can sign up for a yoga class. My
Yeah.
studio.
Yeah.
Ecovillage.
Yeah, thank you.
All
Thank you.
right.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hope to see you soon.